Looking at Li Changgong rushing towards him like lightning, Zhang Yi thought of the information he had obtained about him. Li Changgong was an epsilon with space abilities, just like Zhang Yi. Absolute defense versus I am heaven's will, it was a matter of who was better. Li Changgong was rapidly approaching, while Zhang Yi slowly retreated. Every time Li Changgong took a step forward, Zhang Yi took a step back, but there was always a brief pause in his movements when he fired. This gave Li Changgong the opportunity to close the distance. The sniper rifle is useless against him. Let's drop the sniper rifle. Zhang Yi did not hesitate to put away Thunderstrike, then took out 2 White Eagles with both hands. At medium and short ranges, the White Eagles were now no less powerful than the original White Eagles, and were even more flexible. He aimed the thick barrels at Li Changgong, then fired one black void bullet after another. The latest material created by E-Metal allowed Zhang Yi to maximize his power, which, combined with the power of the void, was devastating. In an instant, a sky full of black void bullets enveloped the area in front of Li Changgong. Li Changgong stared intently, already sensing Zhang Yi's ability to predict his movements. But this was not a problem for him. The speed of his sword was faster than the speed of Zhang Yi's bullets. The rain of bullets completely blocked his path forward. The sword in Li Changgong's left hand was finally pulled out with a clang. My thoughts cut everything. The 2 swords crossed each other and slashed through the air, forming dozens of dazzling sword beams that condensed into a huge net. The moment the black bullets of the void rain touched the huge net of sword energy, even the bullets made of E-Metal and the energy of the void were neatly split apart. There was no force to resist it. In front of Li Changgong's twin swords, it seemed that nothing could stop him. Zhang Yi deliberately revealed a look of surprise on his face. My power was broken so easily by you? From a distance, Li Changgong seemed to sense Zhang Yi's expression of shock, and the smile on his face became more intense. Nothing can stand before my twin swords, only speed can break them. However, Zhang Yi was sizing up the guy in front of him. My thoughts cut everything was one of his signature space abilities, which allowed him to cut through anything in the world with his twin swords. A feather, a fortress, a mutant. Wherever the sword passed, it wasn't Li Changgong who was striking, but everything in front of his sword would automatically break down into molecules to avoid his blade. Zhang Yi remained calm as he retreated, the White Eagle in his hand spewing a rain of bullets like a submachine gun in the hands of a soul fighter. After reaching the Epsilon realm, the supernatural energy within his body had reached a terrifying level, and this kind of indiscriminate attack was no problem for him. In Li Changgong's eyes, Zhang Yi's attack was meaningless, nothing but a waste of time. Nothing can stop me. When my sword strikes, everything will be destroyed. Right in front of the twin swords, Li Changgong's killing intent did not waver, and a huge blue sword beam broke through the air. It was a powerful spatial force that split everything in its path in half. The distance between the 2 quickly closed. Zhang Yi retreated again and again, waving his right hand, and a large number of dimensional gates flew towards Li Changgong, completely covering the space around him. One after another, black void tentacles extended from the dimensional gates, like a terrifying multi-legged octopus monster, containing an extremely terrifying destructive power, lashing towards Li Changgong. Li Changgong did not dodge or retreat, but met them with his twin swords. I told you, your attacks are insignificant to me. Wherever the sword blade struck, even Zhang Yi's most prideful power of the void could not block the rules of I am heaven's will. The power was not neutralized or destroyed, but simply sliced by the sword, unable to harm Li Changgong's body. At this point, the distance between the 2 had been reduced to 3 kilometers. Seeing this, everyone broke out in a cold sweat for Zhang Yi. Everyone thought that Zhang Yi had no chance of winning this battle. The huge gap in strength and personal combat skills between Zhang Yi and Li Changgong, a natural-born general, was too great. How could the efforts of one person win against the accumulated strength of 5 generations? Even Qin Qigong couldn't help but say, if Gochen closes the distance, Chaos will completely lose his ability to defend himself. Gochen is well prepared for this battle, and Chaos has no chance of winning. He said to Manhua, who was far away in Xinjiang, get ready to move. Don't let anyone get killed. Guanlongyue tilted her head and looked at the two people in the arena. She was holding two lifelike carved dolls in her hands. One was Zhang Yi's, and the other was Li Changgong's. I don't think it will end so quickly, she said lightly. Qin Qigong was a little surprised. Did you see something? An interesting smile appeared on Guanlongyue's cold face. The expression on his face is not that of someone who is about to lose. Upon hearing this, Qin Qigong found Zhang Yi's face through the hundreds of satellite images in front of him. He feigned surprise, but his movements were still frighteningly steady, and there was no panic in his eyes. Chaos, what other tricks does he have up his sleeve? How could he overcome the huge gap of 3,000 points in ability index and defeat Gochen? Qin Qigong couldn't help but wonder. In fact, only half a minute had passed on the battlefield. All of Zhang Yi's attacks were broken by Li Changgong in the simplest way possible. Nothing could withstand his twin swords. Whether it was the power of the void or the strongest bullets made of E-metal. In the face of absolute power, they were all reduced to nothing. However, Zhang Yi did not show the slightest sign of panic. He was not a mutant who was known for his attacking abilities. Defense and attrition warfare were his strengths. Interesting ability, but although I can't find an effective means of attack for the time being, you can't hurt me in the slightest. The distance between the two was 3 kilometers. There was a faint smile on Zhang Yi's face. The world he saw with his left eye was no longer normal light and shadow, but Li Changgong's trajectory for the next 2 seconds. Everything under heaven. Huge dimensional gates blocked the space between Zhang Yi and Li Changgong, each gate as large and magnificent as the gates of Xinjing City. They completely blocked the path between Li Changgong and Zhang Yi. I bet your sword can't cut through my dimensional gates, Zhang Yi said indifferently. Li Changgong's my thoughts cut everything could cut through all material things in the present world, but the dimensional gate was only a passageway between two worlds, not a physical object. It was nothingness itself, so what could be used to cut it? Just as Zhang Yi thought that Li Changgong would need to expend a great deal of energy to deal with his doors, his figure suddenly disappeared from where he stood. Li Changgong did not slash at the dimensional gate. Instead, he disappeared from where he stood. As a space ability user himself, he was far more sensitive to spatial fluctuations than any opponent Zhang Yi had encountered before. The invisible door was clearly visible to him as a bright shape caused by spatial fluctuations. Whoosh! He disappeared from where he stood. When he reappeared, he had already passed through the dimensional gate and arrived behind the door. Don't forget, I'm also a space ability user. And my ability is superior to yours. Li Changgong looked at Zhang Yi, who was less than 3 kilometers away, a mocking smile on his face. Since he dared to fight this battle, he had made thorough preparations. He also knew that Zhang Yi, with 13,000 points, could easily escape from Cardalis, who had 18,000 points, because he had mastered the power of space. But Li Changgong didn't care. He believed that his power over space was superior to Zhang Yi's. Zhang Yi's pupils contracted slightly. Li Changgong was using his ability, Space Shuffle. But unlike him, Li Changgong did not have a technique similar to the dimensional gate. Instead, he had the simple ability of teleportation. This was one of Li Changgong's abilities, 6 realms without distance. It allowed him to cross all obstacles without needing to use the doors like Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi frowned slightly and raised his hand. One after another, dimensional gates appeared like huge fragments scattered in space, piling up towards Li Changgong and sealing off the path in front of him. A cold smile appeared on Li Changgong's lips as he flashed through the void like a ghost, dodging one dimensional gate after another. This scene made Qin Qigong and the others watching the battle gasp. Chaos's most prideful means of escape is his space ability. Now he's met his match. Even if he wants to escape, he can't. Jian Han's eyes lit up with excitement. Of course, she hoped that Li Changgong would stand up for her, Azure Dragon, and White Tiger, and teach Zhang Yi a lesson. At this moment, there were actually 2 other people beside Zhang Yi. One was Spirit Guardian, hidden in his shadow, and the other was Yang Xinxin, hidden in Spirit Guardian space. Yang Xinxin was one of Zhang Yi's secret weapons. Her presence could have an unexpected effect at a critical moment. However, it was clear that now was not the time for Yang Xinxin to come out. In fact, most of the time, Yang Xinxin could be considered a finishing move, more suitable for use when the opponent's strength had been exhausted. At this moment, both of them could clearly see the battle between Zhang Yi and Li Changgong. Yang Xinxin's voice rang in Zhang Yi's ear. "Brother, he knows your abilities too well. Think of a way to hold him off. As long as you give me 0.1 seconds, I'll be able to hit him." Yang Xinxin's abilities had also been enhanced, and she had made breakthroughs in her control, timing, and the speed of her arrows. If used well, it was a powerful weapon. Zhang Yi brought her along just in case. Faced with Yang Xinxin's suggestion, Zhang Yi quickly replied, "Don't rush, I want to test him some more." Yang Xinxin was his trump card, and Zhang Yi would not use her lightly. After all, the representatives of the entire Huashu kingdom were watching this battle. If he let Yang Xinxin make the first move, Qin Qigong might also send someone to interfere. Therefore, Zhang Yi decided to fight it out himself first. After all, he already knew most of the other party's secrets. The outcome of the battle would be determined by the combat experience and courage of the two, as well as a little bit of luck. Li Changgong quickly closed the distance, and Zhang Yi's dimensional gate could no longer stop him. But Zhang Yi wasn't in a hurry at all. Instead, he quickly entered the dimensional gate. In a flash, he was 3,000 meters away. It wasn't a flat displacement, but rather a flight towards the sky. Although Li Changgong could also teleport, Zhang Yi could see that he had to land after each teleportation. Therefore, unlike Zhang Yi, he did not have the ability to fly. If he could gain an advantage in space, then Zhang Yi would also be invincible. However, when Li Changgong saw this, he just raised his head and teleported toward the sky without hesitation. When he appeared in midair, his body had already turned into multiple images due to his high speed. Boom! His feet stepped on the air, causing a violent roar, and then his entire body rushed towards Zhang Yi in an unimaginable way, stepping on the air. "Do you think you're the only one who can fly?" Flying cloud steps. Li Changgong rose into the air in a strange manner. He could compress the air around him and use it as a springboard to fly into the sky. From a distance of 3,000 meters away from Zhang Yi, he slashed fiercely with his sword. The power of space turned into a dazzling blue light that instantly cut through the vast sky. Everything under heaven. Zhang Yi opened hundreds of dimensional gates to block the attack. Even the most powerful force would be absorbed by his alternate dimension. If Zhang Yi could block Cardalus's attacks, how could Li Changgong be any different? However, the moment hundreds of dimensional gates opened, Zhang Yi saw a different future through everything follows the trail. The fierce sword light passed through the layers of dimensional gates as if they were nothing, then fell on him, leaving a wound as thin as a cicada's wing on his chest. Blood gushed out from his agile body, and his body was slashed diagonally in half. When he came to his senses, Zhang Yi felt a chill down his back. In the blink of an eye, he opened a dimensional gate and teleported 3 kilometers away. In the blink of an eye, the fierce sword light indeed passed through all his defenses and fell into empty space. This sword strike seemed to have no lethality, not even tearing the clouds in the air, but only Zhang Yi understood how terrifying the power of this sword strike was. Li Changgong's body slowly descended. He could only stay in the air for a short time and was unable to remain there for long. However, as he fell, he looked deeply at Zhang Yi. "My premonition was correct. You can foresee the future." Li Changgong was extremely regretful about this sword strike. He had calculated everything perfectly. He believed that he knew Zhang Yi's abilities like the back of his hand, so he didn't think Zhang Yi would be able to dodge this sword. As long as he didn't dodge, Zhang Yi would die without a doubt. This was because I Am Heaven's Will Space ability was an extremely powerful ability. When he locked onto his target, he would gather his power in one place. The concentrated power could pierce through anything. However, everything outside his target would turn into nothingness, unable to block his attack. In other words, When his sword locked onto Zhang Yi, it would deal a fatal blow to Zhang Yi, but it would not be able to cut a light feather, only passing through it. Therefore, anything that stood between his sword and Zhang Yi would not be able to truly obstruct him. Zhang Yi's face was filled with surprise, but his heart was calm. Thanks to Li Changgong's abilities, he already knew what to expect. But knowing is one thing, and actually dealing with it is another. It was still very difficult. He could slash through any attack, and at the same time, he was the best defense because he could block any physical attack. It ignored all defenses and strengthened the killing power against the target. It ignored all obstacles and could teleport across space. Zhang Yi had to admit that Li Changgong was too powerful. If he let him fight Cardalus on land, even Cardalus might lose to him. In that case, how could Zhang Yi win? Zhang Yi was not in a hurry. He was still waiting. He was waiting until he had a clear understanding of Li Changgong's abilities. In this world, everything could be constructed with data. Once a person's data was analyzed, they would be as good as naked. Now, Zhang Yi had basically grasped an important piece of information about Li Changgong, his 6 realms without distance ability, which allowed him to teleport only 1 kilometer. Compared to Zhang Yi, he didn't need to go through the steps to open the doors. However, in terms of displacement distance, he was only 1/3 of Zhang Yi, because Zhang Yi could deploy up to 3,000 dimensional gates within a radius of 3 kilometers. Then, let's play with you first. Zhang Yi stopped his attack and chose to set up thousands of dimensional gates in the vast space centered on himself. He could freely shuttle between the gates. With Li Changgong's speed, he couldn't keep up with Zhang Yi's shuttling speed. Li Changgong couldn't catch up to Zhang Yi, but his sword could. However, after less than 2 minutes of fighting, Zhang Yi presented Li Changgong with a huge problem. Time. Li Changgong didn't know that Zhang Yi had time abilities, which were even rarer and more abnormal than space abilities. No matter how fast his sword was, it was meaningless if he couldn't strike his opponent. But he hadn't even swung his sword yet, and Zhang Yi already knew where it was going. What was the point? Han Shanzhua and the others could vaguely see what was happening in the battle between the two. Zhang Yi dodged Li Changgong's attacks, even before Li Changgong had made a move. Shang Daowen's eyes flashed, and he muttered to himself, could it be that Chaos not only has space abilities, but he is also a user of both time and space abilities? Han Shanzhua's eyes changed slightly, and the look in his eyes as he looked at Zhang Yi on the battlefield became much more serious. If that's the case, this kid is terrifying. Manhua, who was watching the battle from the Earth God's temple, looked at Zhang Yi, and a strange light gradually appeared in her eyes. He actually has both time and space abilities? 2 extremely rare abilities concentrated in one person. His future is immeasurable. On the battlefield, Zhang Yi could travel back and forth between the 3,000 realms. He raised his hand and launched a powerful attack. At first, Zhang Yi did not display too much power. He was still testing his opponent's strength and disguising himself. But now that he understood his opponent's abilities, there was no need for that anymore. Zhang Yi's ability index was now as high as 15,000 points, and his attack power had also greatly increased. The gate of 3,000 realms sealed off Li Changgong, and one powerful dark tentacle after another extended from it. The powerful force caused everyone watching to change color. This power is more than just a level higher than before. The strength of Chaos is definitely more than just 13,000 points. Han Shanzhua said loudly. Damn, he really did hide his strength. I knew he had something up his sleeve to accept Li Changgong's challenge. Zhang Yi sealed off a section of space, and the power of the void appeared from all directions, then quickly spread towards Li Changgong. Li Changgong's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He held his long sword with both hands and swung it towards the sky at a speed that was difficult to capture with the naked eye. A series of bright sword lights formed an impenetrable sphere around him, then burst out fiercely. All the void tentacles that were touched were instantly split in half. The scattered power caused the surrounding ground to sink into one huge pit after another, silently and without a sound, leaving the plain looking as if it had been hit by a meteorite, riddled with holes. Li Changgong's sword continued its momentum and rushed straight towards Zhang Yi. The sword light locked onto Zhang Yi's gate of 3,000 realms. No matter how fast you are, you can't match the speed of my sword. Let's see how many dimensional gates you can slice open. Li Changgong stared straight at Zhang Yi in the sky, his eyes filled with undisguised killing intent. Li Changgong's attack was impossible to block, so Zhang Yi could only dodge. All the dimensional gates had been sealed by the sword's glow, so using Space Shuffle was now meaningless. At the critical moment, Zhang Yi took a step back into the dimensional space and then completely sealed all the doors. With the only passage between the other world and the present world closed, Li Changgong's attack came to nothing. Li Changgong frowned. Is he completely hidden in the void? He held his breath and concentrated, gripping the two long swords in his hands tightly. As soon as Zhang Yi appeared from the void, his sword would slice through him. He, Li Changgong, must win this battle. He was God's will. In this world, there was nothing that could block his sword. Zhang Yi's flashy fighting style was, in his eyes, very poor and not worth mentioning. Absolute defense? In his eyes, it was nothing but a joke. Nothing could defend against his sword. Zhang Yi entered the dimensional space, taking Spirit Guardian and Yang Xinxin with him. A long time passed in their spiritual world, and Yang Xinxin asked Zhang Yi if she should take action and finish off Li Changgong once and for all. Zhang Yi thought about it and, although it was a good suggestion, he refused. With Yang Xinxin's strength, she could only control Li Changgong for a short time. If they didn't want to kill him or turn him into a slave, then controlling him for a short time was meaningless. With representatives from the major regions nearby acting as referees, they would not approve of such an outcome. Don't worry, I already know how to fight him, Zhang Yi said with a smile. On the plain, Li Changgong held two swords in his hands, waiting for Zhang Yi to appear so he could strike at the first opportunity. He was confident that he could block all of Zhang Yi's paths. Are 3,000 dimensional gates a lot? It was nothing more than a matter of a split second for him to draw his swords. Everyone held their breath and waited for Zhang Yi to appear. Some even believed that Zhang Yi had already used his most powerful technique and that Li Changgong would now have free rein. However, true masters did not think so. The strength of one's abilities was only part of what determined victory. Battle required the use of one's brain. A few seconds later, high above, Zhang Yi's dimensional gate finally opened. Li Changgong twisted the blade in his hand slightly, preparing to deliver the most powerful blow to end the battle. In the Earth God's temple, Guanlonghua silently clutched the two wooden puppets in her hands, her eyes fixed on the battlefield. At the critical moment, she would step in to stop Li Changgong from killing Zhang Yi. However, the moment the dimensional gate opened, something happened that left everyone speechless and unable to comprehend. Zhang Yi did not appear in the dimensional gate. Instead, colorful objects fell from the sky, fluttering like beautiful butterflies. Qin Qigong's eyes widened, Pa Jigsan was stunned, Han Shanzhua shouted awesome, Shan Daowen raised his head and sighed deeply, while Vermilion Bird Jianghan's face quickly turned red as she cursed Zhang Yi for being so frivolous. Because what was flying through the air was not something else, but a large pile of clothes that had been swept up from a department store. Many of them were women's underwear. This was the scene of the Huashu Kingdom's 2 Epsilon duels, which should have been extremely serious, but this comical scene instantly disrupted the atmosphere. But it was this unexpected move that also caused the murderous Li Changgong to be stunned for a moment. In just that brief moment, the large amount of clothes flying in the air blocked his vision, and Zhang Yi appeared from the dimensional space, then immediately activated multiple space shuffles and flew rapidly toward the sky. Everything follows the trail could buy him 2 seconds, but for top-level fighters, 2 seconds could create countless opportunities that could mean life or death. Throwing underwear may seem funny, but it was indeed effective. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Yi was already more than 10 kilometers away. Li Changgong immediately reacted and leaped into the air, using 6 realms without distance and flying cloud steps to pursue him. However, this time, Zhang Yi already had a way to deal with him. When hiding in a dimensional space, time flows extremely slowly, but consciousness and thoughts still function normally. In just 3 seconds, he had enough time to think. Li Changgong, I've pretty much figured out your ability. Everything can be cut, but everything can also be avoided. Everything is false, everything is possible. It seems perfect, without any flaws. But I've found your weakness. The corners of Zhang Yi's mouth curled up. He saw where Li Changgong's weakness lay. That was his defense. Even though Li Changgong was a powerful soldier with a strong physique and terrifying attack methods, his skill points seemed to be focused on offense, while his defense left much to be desired. Li Changgong's strength was similar to Zhang Yi's, using his space abilities to disguise his powerful close combat skills. But his physical body was still just flesh and blood. Without the protection of his combat suit, even a small bullet could take his life. However, the problem was that any attack would be cut in half by his twin swords. Therefore, as long as his attack speed was faster than the long sword in his hand, he would win. Zhang Yi continuously increased the distance between them, reaching a height of more than 10 kilometers in just a few seconds. From a height of tens of thousands of meters, he looked down at the earth below, which was covered in silver, and the cold air even formed a thick layer of frost on his combat suit. Li Changgong was still desperately chasing after him, but facing Zhang Yi, who was determined to escape, he couldn't keep up. Moreover, the higher he went, the more he realized that the temperature in the sky was much lower than on the ground. Although the temperature on the ground was already minus 60 to 70 degrees Celsius, once he reached the sky, it quickly dropped to minus 100 degrees Celsius. His speed began to slow down, frost began to appear on his combat suit, and the speed of his sword swings was greatly affected. Li Changgong was startled. He replied without hesitation. So that's what you've been planning, heh, you've underestimated me. Li Changgong believed that Zhang Yi was planning to lure him into the sky, then restrict the speed of his sword swings in order to defeat him. Zhang Yi couldn't hear Li Changgong's words, nor did he care what Li Changgong was planning. Because now, he was ready to make his move. Everyone looked up at the sky, wanting to see how Zhang Yi was going to deal with Li Changgong. High above, Zhang Yi and Li Changgong pulled themselves far enough apart. With a wave of his hand, everything under heaven unfolded completely beside him. It was 3,000 huge dimensional gates, covering the sky and spreading out for 10 kilometers. From these gates, countless pieces of black metal slowly extended out. There were hundreds of thousands of guns and cannons, including many large-caliber ones that could only be used for city defense. These guns and cannons extended out of the dimensional gates at the same time, and the scene shocked everyone. After the end of the world, heavy firearms were difficult to transport and basically impossible to use in major battles. This was common knowledge. However, Zhang Yi broke this common knowledge. Qin Shigong couldn't help but say, Lord of War. That's right, with his ability to create space and carry countless heavy firearms, if Zhang Yi appeared on the battlefield, he would be a huge army all by himself. Maybe we should reevaluate his strength. Qin Shigong believed that considering his powerful ability in group combat, Zhang Yi's ability index should be raised even higher. But will these weapons work against Go Chen? Han Shanzhua questioned. It looks impressive, but the most important thing is whether it's effective. Shang Daowen raised his head, his eyes flashing with a mysterious color. Perhaps it will be useful. There are no useless abilities or weapons, the key is how you use them. Zhang Yi's approach made Shang Daowen realize where Li Changgong's weakness lay. On the battlefield, Li Changgong raised his head, and when he saw hundreds of thousands of gun barrels and cannons extending from the void, pointing coldly and mercilessly at him, his scalp couldn't help but tingle. So many weapons. Where did you get them? Don't ask, just know that Zhu Jin gave them to me. Zhang Yi's right hand pointed down at Li Changgong as if he were a god judging mortals. Have a taste of what it's like to be bombarded by several armies at once. As soon as he finished speaking, countless weapons in the sky let out a deafening roar, and then bullets and shells fell from the sky like a rain of fire. There was a faint rumble of thunder, and the sky was overcast. A huge meteor shower of flames completely enveloped the land for more than 10 miles around. The speed of the guns and cannons, combined with the force of gravity, caused the ammunition to fall at breakneck speed. Li Changgong's pupils suddenly contracted. No matter how fast he was, it was impossible for him to leave the range of the rain of fire before all the ammunition hit the ground. The only option now was to draw his sword and fight. Facing the endless rain of fire falling from the sky, Li Changgong chose to fight back with the two long swords in his hands. He swung his swords as fast as lightning, forming a dense net around his body that shattered all the bullets. But Zhang Yi, who saw this scene, smiled happily. Interesting. But I have enough ammunition stored in my dimensional space to fire continuously for a whole day and night. I'll see how long you can hold out. Next to Zhang Yi, the huge artillery legion poured out a steady stream of fire like the sky was falling. He had found the weakness in Li Changgong's ability. Although it wasn't fatal, it was enough as long as it was a weakness. I Am Heaven's will was powerful and could slice through almost everything in the physical world. However, he had to focus his will on one thing. Therefore, the objects he locked onto could easily be sliced open. At the same time, he would render everything outside his target invisible. This was originally a very powerful ability. It could ignore all armor and directly strike the opponent's body. However, if it was like this, with attacks launched by hundreds of thousands at a time, how were you supposed to respond? Every bullet and cannonball was real, and he had to slash them apart in the shortest amount of time. Otherwise, even if he was wearing the Huashu Kingdom's top-level combat suit, how many rounds of bombardment could he withstand? 100 rounds, 1,000 rounds, or 10,000 rounds? Zhang Yi was standing high above, not needing to expend any supernatural abilities. All he needed to do was expend a little bit of insignificant ammunition. For Liu Karen, that kind of thing could be manufactured in any quantity he wanted. That way, Zhang Yi could stay here and fight Li Changgong for a day and a night. No matter how powerful Li Changgong's supernatural abilities were, they were still limited. Could he withstand such a drain on his energy? Li Changgong's hands couldn't stop because Zhang Yi's attacks didn't pause for even a moment. The plain around him had been blown to pieces, riddled with holes, and the entire ground had sunk several meters. What a nasty trick, he's really tough. Qin Shigong couldn't help but sigh with emotion. It seems that absolute defense is not a false name after all. Chaos hid his strength, and Gochin underestimated his opponent after all. Jian Han quietly clenched her fists, remembering the battle on Star Island. Zhang Yi's abilities were the most despicable she had ever seen. Even when faced with mutants who were much stronger than him, he could still escape with ease. She had thought that with the information she had provided and Li Changgong's formidable strength, Li Changgong would definitely teach him a lesson, avenge White Tiger, and clear the East Sea region's name. But she never expected that Zhang Yi would become even stronger in just half a year. She was a little confused. Was there such a big improvement after Epsilon? How could he have improved his strength by 2,000 points in half a year? Could Li Changgong think of a way to deal with this? Jian Han looked at the battle scene on the projection. Facing Zhang Yi's attacks, Li Changgong's expression remained determined, without a trace of embarrassment. This offensive seemed very fierce, but for him, it was completely manageable. However, he was not a perpetual motion machine. How many rounds could he block? They were using guns and cannons, while he was using two swords. If they continued like this, even a god would not be able to stop them. Zhang Yi stood high above, and although he seemed to have the upper hand at this moment, he did not let his guard down in the slightest. He had already used his everything follows the trail ability to lock onto Li Changgong. He was going to wear Li Changgong down bit by bit, piece by piece. Li Changgong, what other tricks do you have up your sleeve? Zhang Yi thought to himself. Li Changgong's body remained upright under the rain of fire, but his eyes were clearly much more serious. You think you can wear me down with these tricks? It's not that easy. The twin swords in his hands danced like phantoms. Although there were many bullets fired at him, Zhang Yi wanted to expand his coverage, so only a few hundred bullets per second actually landed in front of Li Changgong, which he could easily block. However, this was not a small problem. Li Changgong was a fierce man, but he was not fierce enough to cut through countless bullets with a sword. The reason he could do this was because he continuously activated his ability, I am Heaven's Will. This power, which could originally slice through a mountain peak and kill a top-level mutant, was now being used to slash bullets and shells. It was like using anti-aircraft guns to shoot mosquitoes, a complete waste of his supernatural abilities. Moreover, the attacks were relentless, and he couldn't even stop to rest. This was also one of the biggest weaknesses of I am Heaven's Will. It was nearly invincible against single targets, but its ability to attack groups was very weak. Li Changgong knew that he couldn't continue like this. Otherwise, sooner or later, he would be worn down by Zhang Yi's rogue tactics. Li Changgong fought back while using 6 realms without distance to try to dodge Zhang Yi's attacks. However, under the lock of everything follows the trail, no matter where he escaped to, Zhang Yi could find his location in an instant. In the gloomy sky, a fiery red color appeared, as if thousands of clouds had been blown away, revealing a huge sea of fire. The rain of fire fell with the wind, and this gust of wind was Zhang Yi's gaze. The landing point of the rain of fire was the direction Li Changgong was fleeing in. Li Changgong tried to escape many times, but Zhang Yi always caught him in the first instance. 6 realms without distance teleported 1 kilometer at a time. Space Shuffle teleported 3 kilometers at a time. As long as Zhang Yi was willing, he could lock him down effortlessly, leaving him with nowhere to escape. After several rounds of entanglement, Li Changgong also realized this. There was no point in continuing to run away. If he delayed any longer, he would definitely be worn down first. He raised his head and looked up at the sky, where endless fire rained down as if the world were ending. A fierce look flashed in Li Changgong's eyes. I can't escape, so I'll just break through head-on. In midair, Zhang Yi calmly launched an attack on Li Changgong. His dimensional space contained most of Blizzard City's weapons, which had once been the largest weapons warehouse in the entire Jiangnan region. There were countless weapons stored inside. In order to win Zhang Yi over and dispose of most of the heavy weapons that would be of little use after the apocalypse, Zhu Jing had given them all to Zhang Yi. Unexpectedly, they had fallen into Zhang Yi's hands and turned into terrifying weapons of mass destruction. Zhang Yi operated them in a very systematic manner. He had long ago asked Liu Karen to prepare automatic loading equipment for him. This simple mechanical device was extremely easy for Liu Karen to construct. Every half-minute, he would replace them with a new batch of weapons to avoid damage from overheating the gun barrels and cannon barrels. This ensured that there would be no gaps in his attack on Li Changgong. He was determined to drive Li Changgong into a corner so that this self-important young man from a distinguished family could experience the taste of defeat. Zhang Yi's offensive did not pause for a moment. Li Changgong also understood that he couldn't drag this out any longer. Zhang Yi's attacks would not cause him any damage, but the more Li Changgong used his supernatural powers, the weaker he became, and he couldn't afford to exhaust himself. After all, he was only human. Li Changgong no longer evaded and decided to face Zhang Yi head-on. He raised his right hand, and his combat suit suddenly bulged, ejecting a palm-sized crossbow. But when the crossbow was aimed at Zhang Yi, it gave him a sense of danger. It looks like if I'm even grazed, my life will be over. Li Changgong's I am Heaven's Will was a rule-like ability. Under its attack, all defenses were meaningless. If it hit Zhang Yi's body at high speed, even if it was just a slight touch, the enormous power it contained would shatter Zhang Yi's body. Whoosh! The crossbow bolt cut through the sky. It was made with some kind of technology, and its speed was so fast that it was difficult to describe with words. Even Zhang Yi's thunderstrike might not be able to match it. This speed didn't even give Zhang Yi time to react. Zhang Yi watched as his head was pierced. When he came to his senses, the intelligent system of his combat suit immediately locked onto Li Changgong's right hand. Just as the crossbow was about to fire, Zhang Yi had already pulled away. The crossbow bolt broke through the air, clearing a long passageway in midair. Behind Zhang Yi, a dimensional gate was silently shattered. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes slightly and thought to himself, that was dangerous. But he didn't know how gloomy Li Changgong was feeling at that moment. He thought he was invincible. However, Zhang Yi's abilities were even more abnormal than his. In front of an opponent with the ability to predict the future, any sneak attack or attempt to exploit a loophole was meaningless. He can predict all my attacks, but as long as my attack speed is fast enough, even if his brain can detect it, his body won't be able to keep up. Or I can use an ability that he clearly understands but can't dodge. Li Changgong analyzed the situation in an instant. Unfortunately, although the theory was easy to understand, it was extremely difficult to execute. At the moment, Zhang Yi was more than 10 kilometers away from him. Having already tested his abilities, Zhang Yi would not give him a chance to close the distance. He wanted to catch up with Zhang Yi, but in terms of ability, his teleportation speed was only 1/3 of Zhang Yi's. Similarly, if he wanted to escape, Zhang Yi would stick to him like glue. Li Changgong felt as if he were stuck with chewing gum. At this moment, he had only one choice. That was to gamble on how many bullets Zhang Yi had left in his arsenal. If Zhang Yi ran out of ammunition, he would no longer be able to use this despicable tactic to attack, and Li Changgong didn't care about his other methods of attack. But then I won't be able to win. Li Changgong's heart was filled with gloom. In fact, the ideal situation would be for him to use up all of Zhang Yi's ammunition. He couldn't kill Zhang Yi, and Zhang Yi couldn't kill him either. The two would end in a draw. But his plan to suppress Zhang Yi and gain fame would come to nothing, and at most, he wouldn't lose face. But he was a descendant of a distinguished family, and he had only fought to a draw with a warehouse manager in a seaside city. There was no glory in that. For the first time, he felt the same way about Zhang Yi as many of Zhang Yi's opponents did. This guy was too unfair. How could he still be alive? Li Changgong had to admit one thing: he had misjudged Zhang Yi's strength and had not expected Zhang Yi to have the ability to predict the future. When true masters fight, even the slightest mistake can affect the outcome of the battle, even life and death. Therefore, Li Changgong had no way to come up with a way to deal with Zhang Yi in such a short time. But he would not admit defeat. He chose to continue the confrontation. At worst, I'll fight to a draw. Although Li Changgong said this, he did not just defend himself. He rushed into the sky, using flying cloud steps to stomp on the solid air and rush towards Zhang Yi. A war of attrition was a contest of patience and inner strength. Even two seemingly flawless opponents might reveal a weakness after prolonged combat. Both of them were well aware of this. Whoever exposed even the slightest opening, the other would not miss it and use it to end the battle. Zhang Yi! Li Changgong shouted Zhang Yi's name in anger, his long sword slashing through the sky, the sharp blade shooting up into the sky. But he had no time to attack Zhang Yi because he had to deal with the bullets pouring down from the gate of 3,000 realms like a storm. The bullets poured down like a waterfall, staining the entire sky red. It was beautiful, but also extremely dangerous. Zhang Yi knew Li Changgong's intention, so he wouldn't give him a chance to get close. As long as he kept fighting, even if Li Changgong was invincible, he would suffer serious damage to his vitality and lose a lot of his supernatural energy. Zhang Yi, however, remained in perfect form. When the time came, he would be able to defeat Li Changgong with an absolute advantage. Li Changgong came down from the sky, and with every step he took, Zhang Yi took 3 steps back. Not only did the distance between the two men not close, it gradually widened. But Li Changgong did not stop, instead continuing to rise into the sky. Until he entered the clouds, his figure suddenly disappeared into the thick clouds. Zhang Yi suddenly understood Li Changgong's plan. He intended to use the thick clouds as cover to dodge Zhang Yi's barrage of bullets, then get close to Zhang Yi and launch an attack. Furthermore, without being able to lock onto Li Changgong, Zhang Yi's everything follows the trail was temporarily rendered useless. Seeing this, Shang Daowen couldn't help but say, "Clever." To evade Chaos's attacks, Gochin must find an object to use as cover and avoid being locked on. And the thick clouds everywhere in the sky are the best cover. Zhang Yi stopped shooting and his eyes quickly scanned the surrounding clouds. Within a radius of more than 10 kilometers around him, the clouds had long been blown away by the raging firepower. In other words, it was impossible for Li Changgong to suddenly get close. but at the same time, Zhang Yi was also unable to lock onto Li Changgong's position. Whoosh! A sharp sword light flashed from behind Zhang Yi and shot straight towards his back. The angle was very tricky, but Li Changgong didn't know that everything follows the trail didn't just have the ability to actively predict. As an upgraded version of Time Echo, it could automatically sense all imminent danger for Zhang Yi. At the critical moment, Zhang Yi's instincts allowed him to dodge the blow and quickly pull away. Li Changgong's attack failed, and he immediately disappeared into the clouds. He frowned. Even an attack like that was detected by him? He felt a little gloomy. God only knew how desperate he felt when facing such an opponent. In his eyes, Zhang Yi had become an almost indestructible being. The battle that followed turned into a fierce fight between Zhang Yi and Li Changgong. The most tragic and dangerous battle took place in the first 10 minutes, with the two fighting blow for blow. Any mistake would mean instant defeat. A 15,000-point Time and Space Mutant and a 16,000-point Space Mutant were the top fighters in the Huashu Kingdom. However, when both sides revealed their cards and neither could quickly defeat the other, it turned into a long tug of war. Li Changgong held his breath, determined to drag it out until Zhang Yi used up all his ammunition. That way, Zhang Yi would be unable to cause him any real trouble. In contrast, Zhang Yi's expression became more and more relaxed. With every minute that passed, his chances of winning increased. Having figured out Li Changgong's abilities, Zhang Yi was now in an unbeatable position. As long as he didn't rush and act recklessly, he could slowly wear down Li Changgong's physical strength and supernatural abilities. The winner would definitely be him. Li Changgong slowly began to feel impatient. He didn't have the ability to stay in the air for long periods of time like Zhang Yi, so even though he relied on the clouds to cover him and launched a few surprise attacks on Zhang Yi, they were all detected by the passive ability Everything Follows the Trail, allowing Zhang Yi to dodge the surprise attacks. In desperation, he fell from the sky, preparing to adjust his posture and launch a second round of attacks. However, as before, after revealing all his cards, an opponent who posed little threat to Zhang Yi could only watch as Zhang Yi tortured him. Now, my turn has just begun. A playful smile appeared on Zhang Yi's lips. From start to finish, he had basically been on the defensive and had not used any truly effective means of attack. But now, the tables had turned. With a wave of his hand, Zhang Yi suddenly brought out 100 heavy artillery from the dimensional space. However, the cannons were not aimed at Li Changgong on the ground, but at the heavy gray clouds surrounding them, which were as thick as mountains. Fire! Zhang Yi said softly, and the intelligent system controlled the 100 heavy artillery, which fired with a deafening roar toward the clouds. Li Changgong clenched his twin swords and stared sharply at the sky. Although he hadn't defeated Zhang Yi, he wasn't afraid of Zhang Yi's attack. There was nothing that couldn't be cut by his twin swords. However, contrary to his expectations, the storm-like attack did not come. Round after round of heavy artillery fire was fired, but after the roar, nothing unusual happened in the sky. Li Changgong frowned and became even more cautious and alert. He knew that Zhang Yi would not do anything meaningless. However, Qin Shigong and the others, who had a bird's-eye view, saw this scene clearly. Han Shanzhua asked in confusion, "What is he doing?" Jiang Han stared nervously at the battlefield and said in a low voice, "It looks like he's planning to make it snow." Artificial snow. Han Shanzhua was slightly taken aback by her words. Snow was falling outside the window, so why would they need to make it snow in this weather? Zhang Yi wasn't a mutant with ice powers, so what use would snow be? Qin Shigong seemed to have thought of something, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Maybe it's not snow? Could it be hail? Han Shanzhua asked. Qin Shigong shook his head. Let's keep watching. In any case, there must be a reason for a battle between epsilons. Sure enough, not long after, there was indeed a strange movement in the sky. The dark clouds that had been bombarded began to swirl, and before long, they grew thicker and thicker, dark and heavy, as if they were about to fall. Crash! Suddenly, torrential rain poured down on the earth amid the strong winds. This sudden downpour caught everyone off guard, even Li Changgong's eyes were a little stunned. Rain? They had almost forgotten that such a natural phenomenon existed. In such cold weather, there was only heavy snow or hail, so where was there space for rain? But at this moment, the rain falling from the sky was clearly not fake. A rainstorm suddenly poured down on the Jibei plain, covering an area of hundreds of kilometers. Hanshan's eyes widened. Holy shit! It's really raining? How did this guy do it? Shang Daowen explained, it's not difficult. You just need to add some antifreeze ingredient to the catalyst. But doing so will pollute this land. He shook his head. This was the territory of the Xinjiang region. Fortunately, no one was farming here now, otherwise it would have been a real shame. But what's the point of rain? Han Shanzhua asked lazily. Shang Daowen smiled and said, Gochin can't fly, so rain is enough to give him a headache. This rain can't reach chaos. And, he said with a gleam in his eyes, what if it's freezing rain? Li Changgong was indeed starting to get annoyed. The heavy rain quickly covered the ground around him, and the original snow began to melt under the influence of the rain. The ground beneath his feet was no longer solid and even began to turn muddy. After hitting the ground, the rain mixed with the snow on the ground and quickly froze. The ground was wet and slippery, turning into a large skating rink. After they had ravaged the area, the ground was already in chaos, with mud and ice mixed with heavy rain, making the ground extremely harsh. Although Li Changgong's combat suit was made of waterproof material and would not be blurred by the rain, his movements were clearly greatly affected. There was one more thing, Li Changgong hated rainy days. Whenever it rained, his mood would become a little gloomy, and he would easily become irritable. High above, Zhang Yi once again summoned countless guns and cannons. Be careful, it's slippery. Zhang Yi said with a smile, and then the guns and cannons around him began to fire violently. An Epsilon-level mutant slipping and falling to the ground, dying a tragic death. The probability of this happening was extremely low, but it was not impossible. The ground was covered with icy rain and frozen and slippery. The faster he went, the easier it was for him to flip over. As it turned out, the legs of an Epsilon-level mutant were no different from those of an ordinary person, and the friction coefficient of the shoes on their feet was not much different either. At this moment, Zhang Yi's attack came again, which was like adding insult to injury for the irritable Li Changgong. Activate anti-skid mode, adapt to the terrain, rain and snow forming ice. Li Changgong's intelligence system immediately adjusted the status of his combat suit, extending anti-slip mechanisms from his combat boots to prevent him from slipping on the ground. However, even with these adjustments, Li Changgong was still greatly affected by the environment. He had to slow down and guard against Zhang Yi's attacks from above. How am I going to break this deadlock? Li Changgong's eyes were serious, and his brain was working at full speed. The best advice his intelligence system gave him was to escape from the battlefield and find a weapon for long-range combat before returning to the fight. But now the two of them were in a decisive battle. If he ran away, it would be the same as admitting defeat, and he would become a laughingstock in front of all the representatives of the 6 major regions. He was unwilling to accept this outcome. The rain poured down, turning the ground into mud. Snow mixed with mud turned the earth into a swamp. Li Changgong had to brave the rain to deal with Zhang Yi's endless attacks. He never imagined that one day, even a mutant of Epsilon level would be troubled by these firearms. Firearms made of gunpowder and steel should have disappeared from their world. But 6-digit firearms were a whole different concept. A terrible thought sprouted in Li Changgong's mind. Should he talk to Zhang Yi? If the two of them stopped fighting at this point and ended in a draw, at least he wouldn't suffer too much loss, and he could save face. Li Changgong was startled, not knowing how he could have such a terrible idea. He was the mighty Northwest King, the son of a military family. And now, he was actually going to make peace with a warehouse manager, a man who was willing to betray his allies for his own interests. No! His dignity would never allow him to do such a thing. But if he didn't, how could he break the deadlock? Li Changgong was indeed a tactical genius, and he was smart enough to know how to use his advantages to win on the battlefield. However, at this moment, he had no advantages in front of Zhang Yi. First of all, he misjudged Zhang Yi's ability index and didn't know that Zhang Yi had time-related supernatural abilities, which put him at a disadvantage. He also didn't expect that Zhang Yi would have a way of knowing about his abilities. This feeling caused deep doubts to arise in his heart. Something's wrong, something's very wrong. It's as if he completely understands my abilities. Otherwise, how could he have made such strange preparations? At the beginning of the battle with Zhang Yi, although Zhang Yi seemed a little flustered, he didn't have any problems responding. On the contrary, as the battle progressed, it was as if he had a formula for completely suppressing Li Changgong's abilities. The gloom in Li Changgong's heart grew heavier. He began to wonder who had leaked information about him. However, he didn't have much time to think about it. Zhang Yi stood high above him, continuously bombarding him with bullets. A little bit of metal could easily be used to make cheap guns, and with a little more work in materials, heavy artillery could also be made. Add a little gunpowder and metal, and ammunition could be made. These were never precious items, and could even be called cheap. So Zhang Yi didn't feel the slightest bit of regret using them. Using them to force a level epsilon mutant into a desperate situation was simply too wonderful. Zhang Yi held 2 white eagles in his hands. He hadn't even used his real trump card yet. He had to wait until Li Changgong was cornered before delivering the fatal blow. He had plenty of ammunition, while Li Changgong's supernatural abilities were limited. The battle continued, and an hour passed without anyone noticing. During this time, Li Changgong tried more than a dozen times to attack the sky. However, he was completely overwhelmed by Zhang Yi's speed and had no chance of getting close to him. Even if he occasionally found a seemingly good opportunity to launch an attack, under the ability of everything follows the trail, all attacks were dodged by Zhang Yi in time. Without a wide-ranging, powerful means of attack, it was impossible to completely lock down Zhang Yi's escape route and launch an effective attack against him. At this moment, everyone watching the battle understood one thing. Li Changgong had lost. In fact, he could have chosen to run away. With his ability, 6 realms without distance, if he was determined to escape, it would be difficult for Zhang Yi to pose much of a threat to him. But this was a battle, and the two were fighting in front of the representatives of the 6 major regions. Running away wouldn't kill him, but he would definitely lose. With Li Changgong's current status and pride, he certainly couldn't choose to lose. Qin Shigong stood with his hands behind his back, already seeing the outcome of this battle. Li Changgong couldn't break Zhang Yi's defense, so he would only be worn down to death. The outcome is decided. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect Chaos to be concealing himself so well. It seems that he gained more than I thought in Mist Valley on Star Island. Qin Shigong frowned, a little worried that what Zhang Yi had obtained in Mist Valley was even greater than what they had discovered in the depths of the Qinling Mountains. Otherwise, how could a mutant of Epsilon level directly increase his ability index by 2,000 points in just half a year? This guy is really a master. Han Shanzhua couldn't help but feel emotional, looking at Zhang Yi in the projection with a rather complicated look in his eyes. If it were him, with Zhang Yi's strength, he would have definitely retaliated when Li Changgong provoked him at the beginning, and it was even possible that he would have fought him on the spot. But Zhang Yi clearly had enough strength to deal with Li Changgong, yet he was still trying his best to avoid a fight. This gave Li Changgong the impression that he was weak and afraid to fight. Looking at Zhang Yi in midair, calm and unhurried, like a cat playing with a mouse, everyone felt a strong sense of fear. This guy was really terrifying. He was so steady that it was frightening. However, there was one person at the scene who was in a terrible mood. That was Jiang Han. Originally, Li Changgong had stood up for her in White Tiger, but now he was in danger, and she naturally didn't want to see that. Thinking of this, she gritted her teeth and suddenly came to Qin Shigong's side. Commander Qin, if they continue fighting like this, there will be no result. If someone really gets killed, it will be a loss for the entire Huashu Kingdom and will not be conducive to the unity of the 6 major regions. Can you step in and mediate, and get them to stop? She knew very well how important this battle was to Li Changgong. Losing to Zhang Yi would greatly affect his already unstable position in the northwest region. Mere military strength alone could not win the hearts of the people. Otherwise, the commanders of the 6 major regions would all be the strongest in their respective regions. Upon hearing this, Qin Shigong's face revealed a meaningful smile. He stood with his hands behind his back and said lightly, "I'm afraid that's not appropriate. They are determined to settle the score, so why not give them this opportunity to resolve their conflict once and for all? It will also prevent any lingering resentment. As for whether there will be any risk in their battle, you don't need to worry. I can guarantee that there will be no casualties." Qin Shigong was still quite polite to Jiang Han. Otherwise, given Jiang Han's current status, she really had no right to make such a request to Qin Shigong. What's more, as a veteran military leader, Qin Shigong was not used to Li Changgong's youthful arrogance. Deep down, he also hoped that Zhang Yi would be able to suppress and humble Li Changgong. Otherwise, with Li Changgong's arrogant attitude, who knew when he would set his sights on the position of the head of the Xinjiang region? Jiang Han asked Qin Shigong for help but to no avail. Her face turned slightly red, and she quietly clenched her fists, realizing that she was powerless at this moment. Compared to her, Pa Jigsan, who was standing beside her, was much smarter. He came to Xinjiang this time with only his ears, listening but not speaking. On the battlefield, Li Changgong had already been beaten to the point of losing his temper. He wanted to escape, but he couldn't. At this moment, he finally understood the origin of the title Absolute Defense. It wasn't just empty talk, but a real and disgusting defensive ability. If he couldn't break Zhang Yi's defense, then it was Zhang Yi's turn to break his defense. The battle lasted for 3 hours. Zhang Yi stood high above, casually firing his weapon and firing bullets continuously. Li Changgong couldn't stop moving his hands and feet, looking as helpless as a dog that had fallen into water. Although his supernatural abilities were incomparably powerful, he was still only a normal human being. Continuously swinging his sword made his arms heavy. Puff, puff, puff. Finally, bullets began to pierce his sword net and land on his combat suit. It didn't hurt a bit. The Huashu Kingdom's top-level combat suit had enough defensive power to withstand direct hits from small cannonballs. But this phenomenon made Li Changgong's heart sink. Once the defense was breached, Zhang Yi's attacks would be like a river bursting its banks, overwhelming him. Li Changgong gritted his teeth, endured the discomfort in his body, and continued to increase the speed of his sword. How the hell am I going to break through his defense? Li Changgong roared madly inside. The moment the bullets hit his combat suit, everyone knew that Li Changgong was completely helpless. He was just holding on to his dignity, unwilling to admit defeat. Jiang Han turned her head away, unable to bear to watch. The smile on Zhang Yi's lips grew wider. Then let's continue. The barrage of bullets, which had continued for more than an hour, suddenly increased in intensity and began to rain down on Li Changgong with even greater ferocity. Li Changgong's pupils couldn't help but shrink. He couldn't even imagine how much ammunition Zhang Yi had left in his dimensional space. Zhang Yi wasn't going to tell him that it was half of the entire Jiangnan region's military arsenal. Li Changgong still gritted his teeth and held on. Another hour passed, and he was forced to inject himself with stimulants so that his body would not tire so easily. However, overdrawing his physical strength would only make him more helpless when he was weak. Qin Shigong shook his head and even exclaimed, "If this continues, he may make history." Shang Daowen couldn't help but ask, "Commander Qin, what kind of history?" Qin Shigong smiled and said, "The first epsilon in history to be worn down by guns and cannons." Han Shanzhua couldn't help but laugh out loud, while Jiang Han clenched her fists, her eyes full of helplessness. If she didn't understand her big brother's personality, she would have opened her mouth to persuade Li Changgong to admit defeat. Li Changgong, who had lost his physical strength, also seemed to be coming to his senses. He knew that continuing would be meaningless. Even if he waited until Zhang Yi had used up all his ammunition, Zhang Yi would still be in perfect condition. Meanwhile, his supernatural powers had been greatly depleted. At that point, he would still be unable to escape defeat. Ding! Zhang Yi's communication device suddenly received a call request. Zhang Yi glanced at it and found that it was from Li Changgong. He raised his eyebrows, knowing what Li Changgong wanted to do. Zhang Yi answered the call. Hello, Li Changgong. Are you planning to surrender? As Zhang Yi spoke, the battle was still raging, and he would not give Li Changgong a chance to stall for time. Li Changgong's deep voice came through. Zhang Yi, we've been fighting for so long, and neither of us can defeat the other. There's no point in dragging this on, so let's call it a day. Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows. Are you saying you admit defeat? Li Changgong immediately said, Don't be ridiculous. Me, admit defeat? You won't admit defeat? Zhang Yi laughed coldly. Then let's continue. I want to see how long you can hold out anyway. If we continue like this, I can fight you for 3 days and 3 nights. Although Zhang Yi's words were exaggerated, Li Changgong couldn't help but feel his heart race. 3 days and 3 nights? That would kill him. He struggled to defend himself from the hail of bullets while talking to Zhang Yi. Let's call it a draw this time. I'll double the 300 million worth of supplies I promised you earlier. The smile on Zhang Yi's lips grew even wider. 300 million worth of supplies? When did the face of the mighty Northwest King become worth so little? Li Changgong said in a deep voice, Then how much do you want? Name your price. He felt a slight sense of relief. As long as there was a price, they could talk. He absolutely could not lose this battle, or he would lose all face. If he could exchange it for supplies, he was certainly willing. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes, and 2 different voices appeared in his mind. One was a voice he had often heard in the past. The world is not about fighting and killing, it's about human relationships. It won't do you any good to offend Li Changgong. There's no need to make enemies for the sake of face. It's better to just squeeze him for a large sum of money. However, there was also a second voice echoing in Zhang Yi's mind. It was Li Changgong who was arrogant and condescending towards you when you first arrived in Xinjiang. He never gave you any face. Even if you accept his terms and settle now, you won't lose anything, but can you really swallow your pride? Zhang Yi lowered his head and looked down at Li Changgong. Through the intelligence system, he could see Li Changgong's arrogant face. Suddenly, an impulse surged in Zhang Yi's heart. He wanted to be selfish for once. Perhaps it was because he had been too cautious for too long in order to survive that he had developed a desire to let loose. No one is born high and mighty. Zhang Yi exhaled deeply and said. Li Changgong frowned. What are you talking about? Aren't you just trying to bargain with me? How much do you want? Name your price. They both knew that this battle would not decide life or death. All that was at stake was their pride. But Li Changgong's pride was very valuable. He was the supreme commander of the Northwest region and the son of a military commander, so he had a prestigious status. On the other hand, Zhang Yi came from an ordinary family and had no reputation to speak of. Li Changgong was certain that Zhang Yi would accept his conditions. But this time, he was wrong. Zhang Yi was still young, and he occasionally wanted to be impulsive. Zhang Yi's voice was playful and cold. This time, I just want to beat your ugly face. Li Changgong's expression froze for a moment. He heard clearly what Zhang Yi said, Go die, Li Changgong.